Hey, thanks for joining me. If you've listened to my podcast or if you've seen other videos on the channel, you probably know I love horror quite a bunch. And I wanted to highlight some movies from last year that I thought got overlooked. In this video, I'm not going to be talking about like Candyman or a Conjuring movie or whatever else, the other big horror movies. I want to really talk about stuff that maybe not everyone has seen. And I want to recommend some cool stuff to you. Here are 10 movies from last year that I liked a whole bunch.
Violation is the best acted movie I've seen all year. There is something incredibly real and visceral about this revenge tale. It's a small story, told non-chronologically over its 107-minute running time. And the fact that the movie is told in a non-chronological order is really key. It's a little difficult to explain without giving it away, but I thought this movie builds tension in such a smart way. I'll give a quick example. There's a scene where two characters are out swimming. One of them is having difficulties, and we've just seen the other one of these characters perform a rather shocking display of violence. So depending on where we are in the timeline of events, the scene is either a bonding moment between these two characters, or it's a setup for an accidental drowning. And that's just one brilliant moment in a film that has many. John and the Hole is a strange film to talk about. I found it deeply disturbing, but I could 100% understand someone watching it and feeling nothing. I feel like I have to explain what I mean by that. This is not a movie that tells you how to feel about the events that are unfolding. In fact, it's purposely vague about what is actually going on inside of the characters' heads. Our main character, John, puts his family inside a hole he found near their house. It's deep enough so his father, mother, and sister are unable to get out without a ladder. In fact, they tell him specifically over and over again, John, go get a ladder. But he doesn't. So there's this interesting shift in the power dynamic of the family where suddenly John, the youngest, has the power to decide the fate of all of them. And as I said before, the movie doesn't really pass judgment or tells us how to feel about these events. It's told in a very matter-of-fact way while still being stylized. As you can see, the movie is in 4:3, and I know that this is the most cliche thing you can say about a movie in 4:3, but it really does give the film like a claustrophobic feel. This one seems to be super divisive though, so you might not love it as much as me. Kandisha is a Shudder original movie that's clearly inspired by the first Candyman, but it still manages to feel fully original and not too derivative. I actually think Kandisha would make a really cool double feature with the new Candyman that they made this year, which is also a very good movie. I love the look of Kandisha. She's this goat woman hybrid with superhuman strength who just tears through her victims. I also think this movie captures youth in a very endearing way. Most of the characters are about to start their last year of high school, and I think the film transported me to a time where you're not really an adult yet, but you're also not a child. So you might make some mistakes, go to some wild parties, experiment with drugs, or, summon an ancient evil spirit. Whoops. I might be overselling this movie, but I think Come True feels like a long-lost Cronenberg film. That's not to say it's a crazy body horror, but it has this sci-fi conspiracy vibe to it that really reminded me of Scanners or Existence. Now, something to know about me is that if I compare a film to Cronenberg, I probably like it a whole bunch. And before I saw Violation, this was my number one film of the year. This is a Canadian film that came out earlier in the year. The story is about a girl who enters a sleep study. She begins having these really strange nightmares and starts to suspect that the people who are monitoring her may have something to do with it. There are a couple of moments in this movie that are just incredibly creepy. The nightmare sequences and the creature design is awesome. So it's a pretty spooky film while having that conspiracy angle to it, which I think it makes for a really cool blending of genres. I've thought a lot about Superhost this year, because I'm surprised we haven't gotten more horror movies where social media plays a vital part of the story. This and The Deep House are the only ones I can think of from this year where characters end up in harm's way because they are chasing internet fame. I feel like that is such a good and underused setup for horror, Because in a world where influencers and YouTubers are always getting into trouble, these types of stories don't necessarily seem too far-fetched. In Superhost, we follow an incredibly annoying couple who run a YouTube channel where they review popular Airbnb locations. They end up in a big mansion out in the middle of nowhere where they meet Rebecca, who is excellently played by Grace Phipps. Rebecca is the titular Superhost of the Airbnb they are staying in, and if I were to describe her, she's like a mix between Annie Wilkes and Mark Duplass's characters from Creep. I actually think this movie has a lot in common with Creep. It's a very tight story with a very strange and peculiar character who you kind of end up feeling sorry for. It also has some of those crazier moments you want in a film like this, especially towards the third act, and there's a really fun cameo by Barbara Crampton. The Trip is a Netflix original movie from Norway. It's about a couple who really hate each other. In fact, they hate each other so much that both of them have planned to kill each other during a stay at their summer cottage. However, this film is directed by the same person who made the Dead Snow films, so things don't really go according to plan. This one is ridiculous, gory, and it's one of those movies that it keeps getting crazier for each minute that passes. You know how most movies have like peaks and valleys to let the viewer breathe from time to time? This movie just says fuck that shit and keeps escalating until the ending, which, I mean, it almost makes the movie a little exhausting at times, but nevertheless, it's a very fun time. If you're a fan of like horror comedies or slapstick or black comedies, this one is a little hard to categorize, but check it out. It's really cool. Saint Maud is probably the most well-known movie on this list, but I still don't feel like it's being talked about enough. Having its US release this year, Saint Maud is the movie that stuck with me the most over the course of this year. It's spearheaded by an amazing performance from Morfydd Clark. The movie's about a caretaker who has recently found God. You can tell that she's very lonely, and you also learn pretty quickly that she has essentially left her old life behind after becoming very religious. Throughout the film, you can tell that there isn't something quite right going on with Saint Maud. Like, she, it's one of these movies where you're not really sure if she's starting to lose her mind a little bit or if something supernatural is actually happening. I'm not going to tell you what happens. I'll stop this plot description right there. But I will say that this movie has the most haunting ending I've seen in a number of years. I think the only thing that sort of compares to it has been Hunter x Hunter from last year. In preparation for this video, I made sure to watch some of the films that had been on my watch list for most of the year. This is one of the last ones I saw, and I'm really glad I made time for it. Till Death is currently on Netflix in the US, and it's well worth your time, especially if you're into films set during the winter. This is a tight thriller with only a couple of characters. We follow Emma, who is played by Megan Fox. She's been brought to a lake house by her husband. The morning after they get there, she wakes up and is immediately put in a situation which is very crazy, and there's no one around to help her. I didn't actually know a ton about this film when I sat down to watch it, so I think I'll stop the plot description right there. My feelings on this film reflects the way I feel about Wes Craven's Red Eye. Because Red Eye certainly has its flaws, it's not the best written movie. However, in terms of directing and acting, it's almost like a masterclass of suspense. So that's pretty much how I feel about Till Death, which is impressive because this is the director's first feature. If you're a big fan of thrillers, I would recommend you check this out. Less is more is an expression that gets brought up a lot when talking about horror films. Another cliche one is, it's actually what you don't see that's actually scary. For as much as I don't want to fall into these traps when discussing horror, I also feel like I have to acknowledge that there is a reason why people say these things. In most cases, these statements are true. This is why indie horror can be so impressive on a very limited budget. There are a couple of things that I really appreciate about Caveat. The first one is how out of their way they go to completely fuck over the main character, because he gets put in such a bad spot in the beginning of this movie. He is asked by his friend to babysit his sister. It's been a while since I've seen the movie, so I forget the exact details. But his friend essentially says, it'll just be a couple of days and you'll be handsomely rewarded for your work. So they get to this very isolated house, and it's on an island, and the main guy is like, hey, you didn't tell me this was on an island. I can't swim. What if something happens? And he's like, it's fine, whatever. Then he finds out, that the sister character, she doesn't really feel safe around strangers, so he'll have to wear a harness with a chain on it, so he can't access parts of the house. And the motivation for all of this seems very strange, but our main character sort of goes along with it because he badly needs money. The other thing I wanted to say about this one is I liked that it's a slower paced movie. It takes time building up tension, and the few jump scares that are there are super effective. It's definitely one of the scarier movies on this list. From the director of one of my favorite ghost movies, Shudder, comes The Medium. It's being labeled as a found footage horror, but most of the movie is shot in a mockumentary style. Maybe those two terms are interchangeable at this point, but I wanted to make that distinction because my favorite type of documentaries are the ones where you go into it thinking that it's about a certain topic, and throughout the film you find out that the story is actually way bigger than the filmmakers initially thought. Some popular examples of this would be Dear Zachary or Tickled. So most of The Medium is a mockumentary in that style. The team follows a shaman, and they fairly quickly get sidetracked when it seems like the shaman's niece is being possessed by something. By that point, it essentially turns into a family story, and that's something I thought the film did really well, because there's a lot of family drama in this film, and they're not completely broken and all hate each other, and they're not portrayed as like a perfect family either. A lot of this is of course in the writing, but I also think the acting is really awesome and helps sell the fact that like this is a real family. Once the possession really starts going, the girl who is possessed does a really fantastic job. I think the only thing I'll say about the like horror element of this film is that I don't find the film to be as scary as Shudder. This one is more gory and over the top, so just know that going in if you're like me and hold Shudder in a really high regard. Like this is not really the same.
So that about does it. I apologize that the audio on the intro and outro here are not going to be as good as the main portion of the video. I'm trying some stuff with a new webcam that I got, and apparently the audio isn't great on it. But I'll fix that stuff for the next video. If you enjoy these types of videos, please give it a thumbs up or like comment or really subscribe to anything. Like it's kind of hard being a small creator to understand what people really want from you. So yeah, any type of engagement would be like awesome. Just feedback, whatever. I'm trying to really do something here and talk about cool movies, make cool music, and all that stuff. Thanks for watching the video. I'll see you next time.